What's up guys, Jared here to talk about the most buzzworthy cinematic contribution of 2019. Just kidding, I obviously mean Joker. Now, we expected that a film spotlighting comic book lore's most iconic supervillain would crush at the box office, but what we didn't expect was that the director of The Hangover Part 2 would be so central to the political zeitgeist. But one of the most interesting things about Joker is that while it clearly resonated strongly in 2019, so much of the film borrows from past cinematic traditions. And when you parse through the copious references from film history, you'll find that they're all drawing from approximately the same time period. That is, the mid-1970s to early 80s. That's not us being evil geniuses. Todd Phillips has said as much.
It was really a group of movies and a time of movies. So I would almost argue that as movies from 1973 to 1981, there's a ton of movies that influenced this film.
Quick caveat, because saying the phrase movies made between 1973 to 1981 A takes forever and B is boring, we're just gonna broadly refer to this time period as 70s cinema, so forgive us for the slight fudging. Now the 70s were an objectively cool and complex time for movies, and we're constantly repping the era in our videos. Still, we've been wondering, why is Joker so preoccupied with this era of filmmaking? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition on references in Joker, and major spoilers ahead for a film that you and 100 million other people have already seen, also older movies like Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. So let's dive in. Phillips' 70s vibe is evident in every frame of the film, from the gritty establishing shots of Gotham to the impressionistic angles of Joaquin's interpretive dancing. But that inspiration also manifests pretty heavily in the movie's themes, which is what we're going to be focusing on today. Now, Phillips' vision board is so crowded with themes from this era, ranging from class conflict to the cult of celebrity, that we could be chatting until the inevitable Joker sequel arrives in theaters. So in the interest of not missing happy hour, we picked the three we find most interesting. Part 1. Bad guys? In the 1970s, the anti-hero reigned supreme. An anti-hero is basically a morally ambiguous protagonist who would probably sell out their own mother for a decent old-fashioned. Now, the 70s were deep in the era of New Hollywood, a period that began in the mid-1960s and was defined by bold auteur directors like Robert Altman, Francis Ford Coppola, and Stanley Kubrick. These guys and their cohorts made daring films like Medium Cool, Dog Day Afternoon, Taxi Driver, Five Easy Pieces, Harold and Maude, Annie Hall, American Graffiti, and so on. According to scholar David Thompson, while films of the previous decade featured naive and liberal revolutionary notions and harnessed the era's optimistic energy, films of the early 70s became confounded by actual experiences that showed the moral bankruptcy of the established order. Yes, you don't have to be a film scholar to see why movies turned grimly cynical. This time period was basically defined by post-Vietnam War despair and anger at the establishment. In 1972, that cocktail of misery was coupled with outrage over Watergate and ensuing disillusionment with the government. By 1974, just 36% of Americans trusted the government. That meant movies about flawed, broken worlds and deeply cynical characters. Fittingly, that also meant the rise of the anti-hero, or that almost always male protagonist who is complex and deeply flawed, sometimes beyond the point of redemption. These characters make shocking, morally ambiguous choices, from Taxi Driver's Travis Bickle, who commits a heinously violent act to save a child victim of sex trafficking, to the King of Comedy's Rupert Pupkin, who takes a famous comedian hostage in order to score some decent airtime for his own stand-up act, to Dog Day Afternoon's Sonny Wartzik, who tries to rob a bank in order to acquire money for his partner's sex change. While none of these acts jive with our general collective morality, we're still able to empathize with and understand the reasons behind each character's actions. But from the mid-70s and on, largely due to one mechanical shark in a certain galaxy far, far away, Hollywood became increasingly reliant on surefire blockbusters, and with some exceptions, has remained that way pretty much ever since. In recent years, that's meant an increasing supply of IP-driven content, specifically those reliably successful comic book movies. Most of those are inspired by superheroes from the golden era of comic books, who typically represent moral rectitude. As a result, these stories are typically pretty black and white about morality. You have a hero, and you have a villain, they duke it out, the hero wins, hooray. Sure, your Spider-Man or Iron Man might make a mistake or learn a lesson or overcome an unfortunate flaw, and Nolan's trilogy certainly shows its protagonist grappling with some moral issues. Still, for the most part, they're unlikely to make an uber morally questionable choice like Travis, Rupert, or Sonny. This brings us to Joker, the first Hollywood film to laser focus on the supervillain. Phillips takes this big budget opportunity and uses it as a vehicle to revive the 70s ethos of a complex character in a doomed society, turning Arthur Fleck into a character that obliterates our easy distinctions between good and evil. Like many of these 70s antiheroes, Arthur is flawed, complex, and to varying degrees sympathetic. But by subbing this 70s archetype into the context of a comic book film, Phillips subverts the superhero genre and challenges the typical simplicity of its morality. There's also another level of subversion too. Phillips is also using a mainstream Hollywood film as a sneaky vehicle for reviving the 70s. That is, the last real golden era of independent filmmaking before Hollywood became a pipeline for big budget action films and hangover sequels. He's dropping mainstream studio dollar bills to depict the challenging morality of these gritty independent films, and to reflexively comment on and complicate the comic book film genre. Pretty cool. Part 2. Fantasy versus reality. One of Joker's defining features is how it bends the distinction between fantasy and reality. This thematic tension also appears in some of our favorite 70s films, most notably the film's biggest inspirations, Martin Scorsese's films Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy. Many people have pointed this out, but Joker borrows copiously from both films. For example, in Joker's best homage to The King of Comedy, it casts Robert De Niro as a famous comedian, exactly like the one played by Jerry Lewis opposite a young De Niro.
How do you do it?
I think it's that I look at my whole life and I see the awful, terrible things in my life and turn it into something funny. It just happens. But what about the first few one-liners? Were they strong enough? I was a little...
Strong enough?
No.
If they were any stronger, you'd hurt yourself. They're marvelous, you daffy bastard.
Like the King of Comedy's Rupert, Arthur also has delusions of finding a father figure in said famous comedian, and when rejected, lashes out violently. And in Joker's best homage to Taxi Driver, it depicts Arthur as sharing Travis's inordinate fascination with guns. In a delightfully dark touch, Arthur and his neighbor even mimic Travis's iconic finger gun to the head, possibly as if to indicate that, like him, neither of them have anything to lose. Both Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy feature outcast characters with pretty bleak lives going through tough times, only to conclude with their greatest, wildest dreams realized. Travis becomes a celebrated hero precisely because of his violent vigilantism, and he gets hit on by his dream girl to boot, while Rupert becomes a world-famous comedian precisely because he took another comedian hostage. These two outcomes are improbable at best and completely delusional at worst. That's why both are also frequently interpreted as being pure fantasy. In Taxi Driver, Travis kills multiple people with an illegally purchased firearm and doesn't go to jail, but rather is valorized. The King of Comedy frequently transitions into fantasy sequences, and the improbable ending could read like one of those. So, despite Scorsese's occasional protest, we too read each film's conclusion as the desperate imaginings of a troubled character with only the most tenuous grasp on reality. But beyond the superficial plot or character references, Travis and Rupert each emerge as a remarkably appropriate blueprint for a character like the Joker, who is notorious for lacking any semblance of a stable, reliable past. We talk about the Joker's ever-shifting origin story extensively in another Wisecrack edition, but here's the too long didn't watch of Joker's inscrutable past. In Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, Joker is portrayed as a failed comedian who had one bad day that turned him very bad. Later, we learn that Joker isn't even sure if that backstory is true, which would make crafting his LinkedIn profile particularly difficult. In contrast, Christopher Nolan's Joker is a pathological liar who seems to ad-lib the truth for his own amusement.
You wanna know how I got these scars? My father was a drinker. So I had a wife. She was beautiful, like you.
Most intriguing, comic writer Scott Snyder gave us a Joker who uses his mysterious origins to manipulate those around him. Fittingly, this includes posing as a psychiatric researcher working on his own report, which he fills with tragic tales of childhood abuse. I did my best to help come up with the story you wanted, the one you needed, the grim and grimy tale of woe, the one a publisher would lay down 6 figures for. Viewed in this light, aligning Joker with the also unreliable perspectives of a Travis Bickle or Rupert Pupkin makes a lot of sense. It actually underscores the fact that we could take the entire movie with a grain of salt. In fact, Joker could almost be read as either A, an imaginary Snyder-style sob story cooked up by the Joker himself while in Arkham Asylum, or B, an imaginary delusional tale of the Joker's rise to folk hero, much as Travis's newspaper clippings or Rupert's memoir were for them. Either way, it gives this lasagna of a film a whole extra layer. But there's another interesting aspect of the fantasy-reality dichotomy. In all three of these films, the deep isolation of the central character leads them to fervently pursue the affection of a beautiful, inaccessible woman. In the two Scorsese films, the men's ensuing short-lived courtships are painted as real and painfully awkward. In Joker, Arthur also harbors an unrequited love for his neighbor Sophie. He takes her out on a fun date and even gets some after committing his first murder. Psych. Dude imagined the whole thing, a fact he doesn't realize until he shows up uninvited at an unsuspecting Sophie's apartment. A clarifying montage shows us that, unlike Travis or Rupert's fledgling relationships, Arthur's budding romance existed only in his deeply troubled mind. The thing about all three of these women is that they are the unlucky objects of these three men's fantasies, projections of their desires to find love, beauty, and a merciful end to their tragic isolation. Except in Joker, this romance is literally imaginary, as if, well, literalizing the extent of these three men's delusional projections. In this way, the film seems to argue that no idealized love story could save Arthur, or Travis, or Rupert from their own rage, pathology, and above all, intolerable loneliness. Part 3. Media sensationalism. This brings us to another important theme that Joker shares with many 70s films, that of media sensationalism. Now, we delve deeply into the influence the 1976 film Network had on Joker in our quick take Joker and the Politics of Recognition, but Network also reflects, rather presciently, on the way sensationalized media can completely transform public perception. In Network, news anchor Howard Beale goes off the rails and decries what he sees as a deeply sick and broken society.
We know things are bad, worse than bad. They're crazy. It's like everything everywhere is going crazy, so we don't go out anymore.
Then he threatens to commit suicide on the air. His crazed rants resonate deeply all across America as people take to their windows to scream at nobody in particular. Greedy news executives, seeing the power of Beale's anger, continue to spotlight him and plan even more sensational media. The film argues that people who are emotionally and spiritually disillusioned with a broken system can be very easily swayed by the forces of mass media, which direct our attention to whatever story is currently sexiest, or in our day, clickiest. The ease with which Howard attracts a fervent following suggests that our desperation to find truth and meaning can lead us dangerously astray, particularly when it's in the monetary interest of TV executives. What's more, Network shows the shrewd way the simple act of widespread media coverage effectively turns a very unstable Howard into a martyr, reframing his objectively concerning suicide oath as a positive act of courage. We see the same effect at the ending of both Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, whether you read them as imaginary or real. Travis's celebrated status as a hero suggests the power of the media to reframe a society's moral outlook, while Rupert's post-crime rise to celebrity suggests that a media spectacle can, as with Howard, turn any audacious act into something worth celebrating. Similarly, Dog Day Afternoon shows the way an opportunistic media will gladly transform someone like Sonny, an adult bank robber, into a folk hero for a compliant, thrill-seeking public. Joker similarly features no shortage of commentary on media sensationalism. After Arthur kills 3 wealthy Wayne employees, the media transforms the anonymous clown into a figurehead for Gotham's impoverished masses, a natural opponent of the revered Thomas Wayne. Excessive and sensational media attention bloats the importance of Arthur's act, turning him, like Sonny and Travis and Rupert and Howard, from mere criminal or madman into a folk hero. As in the other films, the masses comply, and Arthur becomes the unwitting leader of a political movement he doesn't care about. Arthur's political apathy underscores the arbitrary nature of mob mentality, and just how beholden we are to the choices the media makes about its coverage. Though the film is set in a Gotham akin to an early 80s New York City, Joker shrewdly adapts the themes of these films for the intensified media climate of our day. Today's internet hive mind can conjure literal mobs to storm top-secret government facilities, or dunk on children, or mourn the passing of the world's most dignified gorilla. Similarly, the fervor for which Arthur's actions are covered by the media effectively makes him, like Harambe, a folk hero. The violent mob that coalesces around him projects their own rage onto his violent act, and view it as a call to arms. Media spectacle, the film tells us, distorts the truth and misdirects our emotions. There are those who would argue that, just as media attention valorizes Arthur Fleck's actions for the people of Gotham, it does the very same thing for real-world audiences, uniting them behind a violent, dangerous symbol of the mocked and disenfranchised. That's why no discussion of Joker is complete without mentioning the requisite media controversy that surrounded its release. Accusations that the film would encourage violence or validate dark audience impulses were widespread. Perhaps fittingly, both of its two main inspirations, Taxi Driver and The King of Comedy, also experienced their own varying degrees of backlash. Taxi Driver had to make some edits to its climactic scene in order to skate by with an R rating, and was partially blamed for motivating an assassination attempt on President Reagan. The King of Comedy also had its share of naysayers, with comedian Johnny Carson turning down the role of Jerry Langford out of fear of life imitating art, and a healthy supply of negative reviews reiterated his point. This isn't surprising. Films that basically force us to empathize with characters like Travis Bickle or Rupert Pupkin or Arthur Fleck, characters who make us grapple with morality, reality, and probably some other alities that we don't have time to get into, are always going to be a lightning rod for controversy. Ultimately though, we think the way that Joker thematically incorporated its own controversial cinematic forefathers is worth mentioning and pretty cool. But what do you guys think? Is Joker an effective callback to 70s greatness, or a blatant ripoff wearing a clown mask? Let us know in the comments. Thanks again to our incredible patrons for supporting the podcast and the channel. Go ahead and click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching, guys. Peace.